Gaming is an industry defined by its creativity and willingness to experiment. Sometimes those experiments lead to iconic innovations, but other times they lead to some truly bizarre ideas. Today we're looking into the weirdest gaming accessories of all time, from gloves that promise motion control magic to chainsaw-shaped controllers. We're looking at the peripherals that left players scratching their heads. Let me know down below if you owned any of these weird peripherals that I talk about or any that I don't talk about. Let me know what your favorite ones are down below in the comments, and let's get into the video. First up, we have the Nintendo Power Glove, a peripheral that captured imaginations when it debuted in 1989. Marketed as the future of gaming, the Power Glove was one of the first attempts at integrating motion controls into mainstream consoles. Its futuristic design, complete with buttons and a numeric keypad on the forearm, felt like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. The Power Glove worked by detecting hand movements and translating them into game actions. To accomplish this, it used ultrasonic sensors and an elaborate calibration process. While the concept was groundbreaking, the execution fell short. The glove struggled with precision, often failing to register even basic gestures. This made more compatible games frustrating to play rather than immersive. Despite its flaws, the Power Glove became a cultural phenomenon. Its appearance in the 1989 movie The Wizard cemented its place in gaming history, even if the line,
"It's so bad,"
was unintentionally accurate. Today it's remembered as a quirky piece of gaming nostalgia and a symbol of Nintendo's willingness to push boundaries. While it didn't revolutionize gaming as intended, it paved the way for later innovations like the Wii and the Switch. So, the Power Glove, I feel like this is one that everybody knows about. It's just in the cultural zeitgeist in gaming, at least. Everybody in some capacity knows what the Power Glove is, whether it's through the movie The Wizard, or you remember seeing commercials for it as a kid, or you've seen videos about it on YouTube now. I think everybody knows about the Power Glove and how bad it was. That's like the one thing everybody knows. It's just how well it did. It didn't work. I say how well. It didn't work well. But if you watch videos now, I feel like technology has advanced. If you watch Power Glove videos that are over the last few years, they work pretty well, I think, because people have tinkered with them. But back in the day, they did not work. They were terrible. Even the movie made it sound great. Like, oh, look how awesome this thing is. It works so well. But inevitably, it was a hunk of junk. Like most of these that are on the list are. They just never really worked well. The intent was there. The, intention to make a great product and innovate gaming in some way. But inevitably, they usually fell flat. And the Power Glove was just one of the first to do so. Next, we have the Sega Activator, a motion-controlled accessory that was as ambitious as it was impractical. Released in 1993 for the Sega Genesis, the Activator was an octagonal ring that sat on the floor and used infrared beams to detect movements. Players would stand inside the ring and break the beams with their hands or feet to control games. It was marketed as a revolutionary way to play games like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. In practice, the Activator was notoriously difficult to use. The infrared beams were overly sensitive to lighting conditions, making it hard to get consistent inputs. Performing complex combos in fighting games, a key selling point, was nearly impossible due to the device's lack of precision. Instead of feeling like a martial arts master, players often looked like they were flailing in frustration. Despite its shortcomings, the Activator deserves credit for its ambition. It was one of the first gaming peripherals to explore full-body motion control, an idea that wouldn't truly take off until the advent of the Wii and Kinect years later. Today, the Activator is remembered more as a curious oddity than a practical gaming tool, but it's a fascinating glimpse into Sega's innovative spirit during the 90s. The Sega Activator. I actually remember this one, and this is the only one on the list that I've actually ever seen in person and was able to use. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like a lot of people had that one kid in their life that basically just got everything they wanted. All the cool stuff that you wanted as a kid that your parents were like, why would we buy that for you? That kid's parents bought it for them. And looking back, and as an adult now, I'm glad that my parents didn't, because as you can tell by this list that we're going through, most of these are garbage. Sega Activator was one of those as well. My friend had one of these. I got to test it out, and it was just as bad as I just talked about. It barely worked. Half the time you're like flailing around like this and like nothing's really happening, or you're just standing there and it's going nuts. Because what you don't realize is that it's using infrared, so it's going off light. And when you have multiple like light sources in your room, like the light was on, there's light coming through the window, there's like light coming from another room. That Activator is just having an aneurysm, like trying to figure out which light to look at. And all you're really doing is blocking that light to do an input. So when you got light from different sources and you got to block it, it may go, well, you're blocking or it's already being blocked. It's all just mumbo jumbo, really. At the end of the day, I don't know what I'm talking about. But anyways, the Activator was garbage, and it was one of the ones that I actually got to try. So I thought it was really cool in the sense of what it was supposed to do. But when I got to actually use it, I was like, I'm glad that my parents didn't buy this for me, because I would have gotten bored with it in 5 minutes and just gone back to my Sega controller, because at least that actually worked. In 1998, Nintendo added a creative twist to handheld gaming with the Game Boy printer and camera. The camera allowed players to take grainy, low-resolution photos, which could then be edited with fun filters and effects. The printer used thermal paper to turn these photos into stickers, giving players a way to carry their creations in the real world. What made the Game Boy camera special wasn't just its novelty, but its creativity. The device came with quirky minigames, like a Space Invader-style shooter where the player's face became the enemy. It also encouraged experimentation, letting users create pixel art or fun captions for their photos. While the grayscale images were far from high quality, they had a certain charm that made the accessory beloved. The Game Boy printer and camera were surprisingly popular, even spawning a Guinness World Record for the smallest digital camera. Though primitive by today's standards, they offered a glimpse into the interaction of gaming and personal creativity. They remain a nostalgic relic of a time when gaming accessories were about more than just gameplay. They were about self-expression. The Game Boy camera, I do remember wanting one of these. There's not really a whole lot to say about it. It was a camera, and it made fun little mini games, but at the end of the day, it was printing out the worst looking pictures ever, because that was technology at the time. Like, they look so bad. It's like when you go back and look at a 240p video, and you're like, God, this looks like crap. That's what that looks like now. You're like, but at the time, it was so cool. It's like, oh my God, I have a camera on my Game Boy. And as a kid, you didn't have your own standalone camera usually. I mean, cell phones with cameras were far, far away during this time. And just to think that, like, oh, I can take pictures with this thing. I'm a kid. I can take pictures, even though they're grainy and black and white and they just kind of look like garbage. At the time, it was very cool. So I want to run really bad. Again, I think this list should just be called Things That I Wanted That My Parents Didn't Get Me. When Resident Evil 4 launched in 2005, it brought one of the most unusual gaming accessories ever created, the chainsaw controller. This grotesque peripheral was designed to look like a blood-stained chainsaw, complete with gory details like fake blood splatter and scratches. It was a perfect match for the game's intense, horror-filled atmosphere. The chainsaw controller wasn't just a prop, it was fully functional, though far from ergonomic. The controls were awkwardly placed on the handle, making precise gameplay a challenge. However, for fans of the franchise, that was part of the appeal. Owning the chainsaw controller wasn't about practicality, it was about showcasing your love for Resident Evil. Over the years, the chainsaw controller has become a sought-after collector's item. Its combination of grotesque design and practicality makes it a standout example of how gaming accessories can be as much about art and fandom as they are about functionality. The Resident Evil 4 controller, I never wanted this one. This is like the one on the list that I didn't want, mainly because I was a little bit older at the time and I was like, understood that this was a gimmick that just made no sense. Like, look at this controller. Why would anyone want to play with that? But obviously people did want it for collector's purposes or because they thought it was cool to play with. But at the end of the day, it is a terrible controller that is just not built to actually play with. And people, still wanted it. They still want it today. And I'm not one of those people. I don't really care about that kind of stuff. But, to some, it's like, oh, cool, a unique controller to play with. Not for me, maybe for others, but something nonetheless. And finally, not something from the 90s that sucked just because it was technology way ahead of its time. Just, a silly little chainsaw controller. Konami LaserScope, released in 1990 for the NES, was a headset designed to take commands to the next level. Equipped with a microphone and a red visor, the LaserScope allowed players to control games by yelling commands like fire to shoot in titles such as Duck Hunt. Unfortunately, the LaserScope's execution was far from flawless. The voice recognition system was rudimentary, often mistaking background noise or even random sounds for commands. This led to chaotic gameplay sessions where players would unintentionally shoot at nothing or fail to shoot when it mattered most. The headset itself was bulky and uncomfortable, adding to the frustration. Despite its flaws, the LaserScope holds a unique place in gaming history. It was a bold attempt to rethink how players interacted with their games, and its design, complete with a sci-fi style targeting reticle, made it unforgettable. While it didn't catch on, it hinted at the potential of voice controls, a concept that has become increasingly relevant in modern gaming.
The Konami LaserScope. I remember this one too. Probably still a little ahead of my time. I was very young when this thing came out, so of course I was a child. I'm like, I want this. I want this. Only to realize later on in life that it was a huge piece of junk that, like the Power Glove or the Activator, just didn't work. The idea was there, but it's one of those gimmicks that was just kind of thrown across and like, hey, what if you use your voice to play the game, except that we don't think about outside light sources or outside noise or the fact that the mic probably sucks or that, just all these things. That was the trend, is like, let's make some new gimmicky controller or whatever to play these games, but we haven't even figured out how to actually make them work well. Like, do you think when they were developing these things that they were in the room like playing with it and they're like, it works fine, I guess. Like, sure, ship it out. That's probably how it had to be, right? They're like, it doesn't work half the time. It barely works. It doesn't even recognize your voice, but it occasionally it will, so we can sell it that way. That's got to be what it was. Anyways, the Konami LaserScope, I wanted one, never got one, only to learn later on in life that they sucked, just like all the other stuff we talked about. So, for video game accessories, I feel like the Konami LaserScope just kind of is a nice way to top it off and just go, all of these accessories sucked. So those were some of the weird gaming accessories that have come out over time. These quirky peripherals remind us that gaming is about more than just playing. It's about experimenting, innovating, and sometimes failing spectacularly. What's the strangest accessory you've ever seen or used? Let me know down in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more videos like this. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. I love you. Bye-bye.